and welcome to episode 2 of the podcast, All About Books. So, episode 2 and episode 3 are going to be about the same book because there's so much to unpack in this book that I'm actually breaking it up into 2 different episodes. But the book that we're going to be talking about today and starting to talk about for part 1 is The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rubin. So, there's the book here. It has, again, I love the hardcover, and this has a real kind of cloth like finish on it. And it actually feels really cool in your hands when you're reading this book. And so it's pretty interesting book. The chapters are fairly small. There's many different chapters, many different concepts within the chapters and everything. And that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. And so I'm going to be breaking it up because it is just a big book full of amazing ideas, and it would take quite a bit to go through this. But, in this book, Rick starts off by reminding all of us that creativity is for everyone. We are all creative in our way, one way or the other. We're creative beings. It's not just reserved for artists or people that want to call themselves artists. It's a universal trait that essentially is in all of us. And our levels of creativity differ from person to person. But in all areas of our life, if you take a look at your life, you have been creative at some point. And so this is the kind of interesting thing when you read through this book and you read the different sections about creativity, and you can see which sections actually relate to you and which sections maybe don't necessarily resonate with you, but you can see how they could resonate with somebody else. So as I mentioned, this is a book that I will probably revisit a few times. It's so packed full of information that I know there's things that I've completely missed. It's just stuff with wisdom. And so I'll probably go through a second, and later on in the year, I'll go through a third read. But again, just so I can at least skim the surface for you, we're going to do this in 2 parts, 2 different podcasts. So you get all of the kind of the goodness that I got from it. And then I hope you pick this book up because this has just been an absolute fantastic read. So one of the first things you have to understand about creativity is creativity evolves over time. So back when I was younger, in kind of my 20s and 30s, I would have told people if they asked me if I was creative, I would say, well, I am creative because at the time I was actually doing oil painting. So I would do some oil painting and things like that. And of course, people naturally see the art, creative. Okay, we get it. Well, now things are different. I'm not doing that anymore, and I'm being creative in other ways. I'm creative in the training content that I create and deliver. I'm creative in the presentations that I give, and I'm creative in the things that I write down. So creativity can evolve for you over time. So Rick said a really good quote here. I'm going to read it for you here. There's a time for certain ideas to arrive, and they find a way to express themselves through us. So ideas are going to come and go, and they're going to find a way to express themselves through us in the different seasons of our creativity. So the first main point that I wanted to cover on this podcast, everyone is a creator. It is not a rare ability. We all have it. It's not difficult to access. We just access it in different ways within our lives compared to other people. So it's a fundamental aspect of being human, making something, producing something, drawing, writing, speaking, all of that stuff is creative. It's basically taking something that didn't exist and bringing it into existence. So think about all the things that didn't exist in your life that you created and you brought that into existence. And it doesn't just have to be art, music, a solution to a problem, a new way of thinking. That's all being creative. So we're all creative. So that's how we're starting with the book. And then once you get that framework, you can kind of go through the rest of the book with that in mind, that you are a creative being. Second concept to talk about is called the unseen. And I'll read you a second here. It says, the artists generally aren't aware of it, but the end work is a byproduct of a greater desire. So your end work, what you're producing, somewhere inside you, you desire to produce that. You desire to bring that up. You desire to bring that to life to show other people. Our creations allow us to share a glimpse of that unseen, that inner kind of landscape that's beyond anything that we could imagine. We just lay it out there, and it's like sometimes we take a step back and go, wow, look at what we just created. Look at what we just wrote. Look at what we just did. So watch for those moments in your life where you produce something that actually surprises you a little bit. I'll be writing some things down, and I'll take a step back and I'll reread what I wrote, and I'm like, wow, I that was kind of cool. Not too sure where that came from. Obviously, it was the unseen inside of me, just waiting to get out. Musicians will often discover that they'll be starting to work on a piece of music, and then it just kind of morphs into something else. And somebody that's maybe with them will say, "Whoa, where did that come from? That was awesome!" Or, "Whoa, do that thing you just did again. That was so cool." That's kind of that unseen component of your creativity that's just looking to leap forward and make itself known. So another quote that Rick has here: "Look for what you notice, but no one else sees." So in your world around you and in your environment around you, look for the things that you pick up on that nobody else actually takes notice of. Maybe that's a little bit of your creativity starting to show itself a little bit. It's starting to alert you to say, hey, there might be something here that you want to focus on. There might be something here that you want to discover or experience, and no one else really caught that. Okay, so one of the other next sections in here has to do with practice. So we've all heard, the saying, practice makes perfect. Practice is the embodiment of an approach to a concept. The fact that we're practicing our craft, we're practicing our creativity, but we're practicing actually living in a state of openness and discovery. See, when you practice living in a state of openness and discovery, things will just come to you. You will notice things. You will think things. You will hear things. And we do this in our daily life by maybe going out for a walk, just doing whatever we need to do to practice slowing ourselves down a little bit, slowing our minds down, becoming open to the idea that we may have something inside of us that we need to share. We have something that the creativity needs to bring out. And when you're in the middle of all the stresses and anxieties of the week and the day, that stuff's not going to appear. It's in those quieter moments. It's on those walks. Maybe you meditate. Maybe you pray. All of that stuff. Those things come up. Maybe you decide to go for a nice, a fancy meal where you decide to go to a restaurant that boasts the quantity over the quality, and you decide to sit and eat each bite nice and slow to see what you discover, to see what your senses tell you. It's, might be sampling different wines, things like that. It's just slowing down just a little bit to allow that inner creativity part of our being to pop to life and say, hey, this is kind of new. This is kind of exciting. This is kind of refreshing. One thing, though, about being a creator and being an artist is that a lot of times artists and creators will go through a season of self-doubt. So self-doubt is another section that's in the book. And it is really talking about the fact that we're all imperfect beings. And a lot of times we will produce things that we take a look at and then say, there's no way that's any good. We start to doubt our abilities. We doubt our creativity. Half the time I look at some of the videos I produce, I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm watching this. That looks horrible. Yet it's some of the best content that performs online. Some of the craziest things that I've produced in video and put it online has got the most attention, the most engagements. But it started by me doubting myself. So as a creator, as an artist, as a person that's looking to build things, you're going to wrestle with self-doubt. It says here that you need the desire to share your work needs to be greater than the desire of, or needs to be greater than the fear of judgment. So the desire to share your work needs to be greater than the fear of being judged over your work. So you need to understand that some of the best discoveries in art, in creativity, is in the imperfections that you produce. And when you doubt yourself, whereas your audience takes a look at that and sees brilliance in the work. So another quote that Rick has here: the person who makes something today isn't the same person who returns to the work tomorrow. So that speaks to the fact that we're always evolving, we're always growing, we're always learning. We learn lessons and we apply those lessons into our work that we do tomorrow and the next day. Well, that's true with art, that's true with creativity, that's true with anything. There's been times when I've created training content as an example, and I've delivered that content, and I could tell in my delivery that a certain section didn't quite resonate the way I thought it would. Well, I just take a note of that and I go back and I change that. It doesn't mean, your production, your art doesn't have to stay the same. You can change it, you can evolve it over time. You're not the same person that's approaching it a day or two, a week, a month, or a year later. We're always changing. With art, there are, I want to say that there are rules, but when it comes to rules, there's a great section on rules in this book, and it really talks about the mathematical rules and the scientific rules, and how those rules and those laws are very, very stringent. They're kind of determined for you, and that the rules of math and the rules of science are completely different than the rules or the law of art. So artists, it says here, the artists follow assumptions, not absolutes. Math and science, you're probably going to be following more absolutes. Rules direct us to average, and that is not our goal as a artist or a creative being. We don't necessarily want to be average. Okay, we want to be above average. We want to be brilliant in our work. We want to be masters of our craft. Okay, so we've got to be careful that we're not succumb to any kind of different rules. One of the great examples of a rule is when you walk into an art gallery and you take a look at how many of the paintings on the wall are rectangle in shape. Whether they're portrait or whether they're landscape, they're still rectangle, and they're framed rectangle. Well, that's kind of one of those rules that somebody came up with sometime. And then you go in and you walk into maybe a different area of the art gallery and you see a painting that's a circle. That stands out to you because it's different. It's not rectangle. It's not the rectangle portrait or landscape that you expected. It's a circle. Or or the painting is actually on something. It's not on canvas. It's on a chunk of wood or something like that. That's, in that case, that artist, that creative person kind of broke the rule a little bit, decided, hey, I'm not going to do what everybody else does. I'm going to be just slightly different. So it says here that, you need to value your own approach to your creativity. Okay. Holding every rule as breakable in the art creativity space is actually kind of a interesting, and it's a suggested way to live as an artist. So remember that when you're creating and you're in that creative zone, again, whether you're doing, visual art, music, whether you're writing, don't worry about the rules. Just go with what works for you and what you want to create and what you're feeling inspired and led to create. With that, we have to remember to apply some patience. And there's a section in the book that talks about patience. In art, there is really no shortcuts. Patience is required for crafting the type of work that is going to resonate with you and resonate with your audience. You can't be out there just to rush it. It says here that if there is a rule to creativity that's less breakable than the others, there's a need for patience to be ever present in the work that we're doing. Okay, take a look at it. Slow it down a little bit. You're not rushing. When you rush, you're not producing your best work. When you rush and you're impatient, you're really not allowing that creativity to speak through you, because in rushing and being impatient, you're getting into that stress, anxiety type mindset. And when you get elevated into that state, your ability to be creative just kind of drops. And there's not going to be any creativity in there. So remember that whatever you're creating, take your time with it. Just let it happen. Be patient. Rick says here in another quote, the art creates a profound connection between the artist and the audience. Through that connection, both can heal. And I thought that was a really interesting quote. The fact that, people can use their art and use their creativity to just make monumental shifts in another person. How many times have you seen somebody go to the movies and they're crying? Or they go to the opera and they hear a beautiful piece of music and they start to cry. They've had a physical shift based on the experience that they're experiencing with that particular piece of art. So I think that's kind of fantastic, the fact that, we can create things that actually move people in that kind of manner. And we see examples of that all the time. The movies, the music, a book that you might read and it actually, makes you feel a certain way. That's just the artist basically pouring themselves into their creative act and connecting with you on a different level, on an emotional level. That kind of moves us into a next section of the book that deals with inspiration. Inspiration involves basically creating space for insights that you might get, that your audience might get based on your creation. So for inspiration, it's recommended that people that are really successful in this space and seem to get their inspiration, again, they've figured out how to quiet their mind, quiet everything that's going on through maybe meditation, just being silent, through prayer. They're going to do different things, walks in the woods, different things like that, just to kind of clear their mind so that they can be inspired. A lot of times we're inspired by the things we see. And if we're too busy in the hustle and bustle of life, we're going to miss half of it and we don't see anything. So it's about focusing on quality as opposed to quantity. So think about what I said earlier about going to a fancy restaurant, that the food is all about the quality, not the quantity, and then just eating it slowly and enjoying it and seeing what you see and feel what you feel and taste what you taste. You're allowing yourself to get inspired by what you're partaking in. However, there's a little bit of a warning that's in the book, and I think it's really interesting and it needs to be brought up. It says here that the artist's life cannot solely be based on waiting for inspiration. There are going to be times when the art does need to move on, the creativity process does need to happen, and you're not going to be 100% inspired all of the time. If the piece of work, if the craft, whatever you're doing, does require that level of inspiration, then in that moment, when you're not necessarily inspired, set it to the side. Work on something different. I do that all the time. Sometimes I'll be writing something down, or again, working on some training, or creating something, and I'll kind of all of a sudden I'm just losing it. My mind's going all different places. I don't feel like I'm in the zone. Like how many times you hear people talk about being in the zone? I don't feel like I'm in the zone. So I'll actually stop doing that work and I'll go work on something else. And then when the inspiration comes back, or when I feel like I'm in the zone, in the pocket, I'll go back over to that piece of work and pick up where I left off and continue. A lot of times people will find that there are certain types of, there's certain times during the day when they're in their zone, in their pocket, in their highest inspirational moments. For me, I know that if I have to be super creative with things, I got to really look at doing that between about 5 a.m. and about 10 a.m. In the afternoon, I'm not nearly as inspired, as creative or resourceful as I am in those first quiet early hours of the morning. I know people as well that are night owls and they're super inspired, super creative really late at night. It's something that you have to discover about you so that you can adjust your work and adjust your creativity and the things that you want to put out there. You're going to adjust that so that people, so that people get the very best from you when you're the very best, and not necessarily when you're trying to just slog through a day. So another quote here that Rick has: talent is the ability to let ideas manifest themselves through you. Think about that. Talent is the ability to let ideas manifest itself through you, through your writing, through your art, through your music, through your speech. Okay? That's where the talent comes from. That's where, you're basically putting it out there for other people to enjoy, other people to appreciate. So in this book, there are a ton of different concepts like that. There's a lot in the book. There's a lot to go through. I touched on some of the key ones that I found in about the first half of the book. And as I said, next week, I'm going to go through and introduce you to some concepts in the second half of the book. But the things to remember that I think are super important and that Rick wanted, everybody to know is, first of all, we're all creators. We all have something to offer to the world. We're all creators. We're all going to have seasons of self-doubt. We're going to have times when we're going to question our abilities. We're going to question our work. And what I would just say is a great suggestion is, whether you can question it or not, doesn't mean you stop producing. It doesn't mean that you don't put it out there. As I mentioned, some of the videos that I thought were crap, I put them out there and people commented, resonated with them, everything like that. Who knew? Be patient in your work. Okay. Don't rush your work. Natural, solid, inspirational creativity is not going to come from rushing it. And make space to be inspired. Make space to be able to hear what is around you, to be able to see what's around you, to give you inspiration to keep going and to create better and better works. And remember that when you create your works and you don't necessarily like something, learn that lesson, adjust going forward, because you're never the same person coming back to the work as you were when you started the work. So friends, I hope that you pick this book up. It is fantastic. As I said, it's going to be one that I'm going to continue to read over and over again. And next week, I'm going to go through some concepts in the back half of the book. So until then, I hope you maybe grab that and, really start to get into it and enjoy it as much as I have been enjoying it. All right, everyone, take care.